Um, and so, yeah, so when I was working on the Trans Obituaries Project and trying to piece out how we map the epidemic of violence in 2019, but also like how we build out a framework, it was important for me to lean on the knowledge of folks in community, but also to lean on the knowledge of folks who have been doing abolitionist work for a long time, right? Of which you
Mhm.
are one of those folks. And so when I think about, the need for abolition, it goes beyond this idea of the prison industrial complex, right? Like we know it's what is also happening in terms of crimmigration. It's also
Mhm.
what is happening to our family who is detained. That is literally a version of prison, like that is the same system. And so, I am bothered by these myopic ideas that what is happening to immigrants is not connected to what is happening to folks born, particularly Black folks, particularly Latino
Mhm.
folks born here. It's all connected and it's all
Mhm.
state violence. And so when we're talking about abolition, we're talking about all of these different arms of the state that are oppressing us and killing us. So I think about that. I also think about the fact that, we're not just facing state violence. We have to have a holistic conversation on violence that
Mhm.
also includes the violence we are facing at the hands of people in our families,
Mhm.
of our partners, of people in our communities. And if we don't talk about patriarchal violence
Mhm.
specifically, then we are not going to actually be able to build this kind of liberatory world that many of us are seeking. And
Right.
so that is so key. Um, and I'm grateful for this space for us to talk about this because I do think that a lot of times our communities are so singularly focused. I'm guilty of this,
Mhm.
especially when I talk about centering Black trans folks. But when I censor Black trans folks, that is not to say that I am not cognizant of and aware of what my brown siblings, sisters, and brothers are going
Mhm.
through. Because I think it's all connected, and
Mhm.
when I think about the fight for Latinx liberation, that is also a Black fight as well, because there are
Mhm.
plenty of Afro Latinx folks like our sister
Mhm.
Leilene Cubalete Polanco,
Mhm. Mhm.
who has been killed by the state.
Mhm.
So there's such an overlap there for me, and I thank you for being one of the folks who has expanded my analysis
Mhm.
on what Latinx communities are going through.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that analysis. I think it's critical. I think it's the next step for many of us. And I think we're all in this process. We're learning and really taking pieces. And how do we also, hold ourselves accountable to community? I think you mentioned 2 points. One is community, like the report was based on community organizing at the grassroots levels. Those are the voices that, like Marsha and Sylvia, were advocating, right? Sex workers, people in jail who are dehumanized, who are being beaten up, and all this violence that they're facing, and also the framework of abolition. I think in times where people are so afraid to speak up, like, oh, let's just reform, let's get someone else in place that will do less harm. So I think that is extremely important for us to dig deeper and make those connections. I think about, yes, Leilene, who was murdered in Rikers prison. I think about Roxana Hernandez in immigration detention, Joanna Medina during Pride Month a year ago. And in this Pride Month, we are seeing more murders of Black trans women specifically, and the Latina in Chicago. So I think that is something that we have to really commit to, right? Abolishing the systems that further dehumanizes us, and also beyond the apparatuses of the state. You are absolutely correct. I have a friend who works at a Department of Correction officer, and he told me about murders that he witnessed, and I was like, damn, I was taken so like harsh by the details of it, and I was like, did you not feel anything? And the response that I got was like, oh, I don't see them as human. And that was something like another more affirmation for me that this is not the solution. That, so sad to see this. So I just wanted to, um, extend on that, but definitely give you more time to move into that political education component and how essential it is for us to really build intentional solidarity with each other.
Yeah. And I want to give a quick shout out because I know
Yeah.
I saw Transitive from Arkansas is on.
Yes.
Yeah, sharing a lot of information about
Hmm.
what happened to Brayla Stone. So thank you for y'all's work too. Um, yeah, political education is essential. Someone just said that. I think people have, we've got to get out of these ideas that education is just academia,
Hmm.
or that it's just kind of this white supremacist idea of what education looks like. Like our peoples have been sharing education through oral history, through culture, through music, for so long. And I think we've got to figure out to have different ways of reaching people because there are different intelligences that we
Hmm.
can connect with. And so that inherently speaks to accessibility. That speaks to, in terms of ability, of course, but also accessibility of knowledge and how it has been so, there's been so much gatekeeping around that. So that's one piece of it, is thinking of new ways to do that. And that's why I love media and storytelling because
Hmm.
you get to kind of play with different types of media. But then I also think about who we consider to be a leader or an expert. And so what was important to me was like, when I was drafting the Trans Obituaries Project and trying to build out a framework, which I acknowledge it is evolving, um, I was pulling on community knowledge. So I
Hmm.
wasn't, these were experts, y'all are experts and you were
Hmm.
you were featured in it as well. I didn't lean on academia because folks out on the field are the lifeblood of theory. They are the lifeblood of praxis. And so we have to continue to understand that and lean into that power. And then the third thing I'll say is we all have a duty to invest in political education. So from a structural level, our organizations, especially the ones that have bandwidth to do political
Hmm.
education, need to be elevating our voices, our experiences, our expertise, particularly of the folks who are doing grassroots work, and supporting us and elevating our messages. But we also need to be having um, creating spaces that are purely for political education. Because sometimes when we're in active mode, we got to get this campaign done. There's so much going on. We don't have space to sit down and be like, hey, actually, I noticed you said this thing that was off about trans folks, or off about non-binary folks, or off about sex workers, or off about immigrants. And I want to sit down with you and have a conversation about that. Like those moments are also political education. And what I found in movement, and I think it's seeped out of movement, is there's an elitism, and there's an idea of purity of politics. And no one has pure politics. We all had to learn from someone, from something, from somewhere. And so we've got to be able to balance, when we're holding people accountable, also extending a bit of grace and humanity, understanding that everyone hasn't all have the same access to tools and experiences, to necessarily speak the same, use the same language in terms of liberation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that is important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe I'll say one more thing that feels maybe more concrete is we have to have, as we're having these conversations writ large about white supremacy, we
Mm-hmm.
have to be talking about the patriarchy. And that
Mm-hmm.
includes all of the patriarchy's children: transphobia, misogyny, homophobia, binarism. It's all connected, and we have to be able to have those conversations.
Yes, thank you